All right. So I'm pretty pumped in these thoughts about paradoxes right now. Thought, like all that exists within, you know. But at the same time, we do some very unobvious things to ourselves, unto ourselves, but some very obvious things nonetheless. So a paradox is kind of, it's described as, I guess, a dead end. But really, the paradox, it serves a purpose. There's a purpose for the paradox. There's a reason that we have. And so there's a reason to go beyond that reason and beyond that reason. And we can say a paradox is no different to the topic of enslavement, especially at present. I mean, we have animals that are enslaved to people, to man, and then we as animals on this planet, we're enslaved to our nature, the nature of our circumstances, the nature of our reality. We'll get metaphorical, the nature of the atmosphere we share. But we also see things that are depicted like monuments or like child's drawings. In places like Egypt, just the pyramids themselves are, as shapes stacked on one another. And symbolically, they remind us of a time when people were imprisoned in a more literal sense, where it was very obvious, it was known to the people that they were also prisoners in their own reality, and they had to find a way to accept that. And then we come to these points now where throughout our history it's depicted in our wars, it's depicted in our video games, it's depicted in our attitudes. We go to war, and the Japanese go to Korea, and they put a bunch of people in Korea in camps. They strip the materials and minerals from the communities and civilizations, and they even took some of the people and used them as kamikaze fighters, in which they were tasked to, paint a target for themselves, unload all their ammunition, and then crash themselves into that target, as a finale to whatever was going on. And same thing over here in America. I mean, during those same times, Americans went and gathered up Asian Americans and put them in internment camps. I mean, there's tons of books on this. These things are anti-Semitism, they're racial, and they're because of a lack of growth and development globally. So imagine spread throughout all the continents on Earth, all the continents that we've counted, all the continents, all the countries. Imagine in all these individual communities, people started to rise up against themselves, against their own attitudes, and say, I've done something wrong, and I need to be redeemed. I need to amend. And so they raise their hands and say, let's live for one another and not for ourselves. And then governments who feed off of the energy and the money and things and power and knowledge and things that they receive from others feeding for only themselves, that suddenly vanishes. And so these places, they start dividing us up. They divide us up in our perspectives. They try to reach you on the level of intellect and on the level in which a person can feel with their heart, when really there needs to be a balance between these two things globally. So it's not that we should be serving the intellect of the world. Nature has a mind of its own and has more in mind than we're capable of. We don't have the capacity to entirely fulfill nature's purpose. If we could even find the capacity to want to know that nature has a higher purpose. So when these things disappear, the government's, for them it's something must be wrong. So what happens? We see racial divide, we see the anti-Semitism, and then if war comes, we're going to see it on a higher level. It's as if governments and people can't find the common ground to speak between themselves, and so one raises oneself above the other, and this just doesn't work. One cannot raise oneself above one's circle. I mean, we put the government in place because we need them to take the places that they do, to be in the roles that they are in, and to embrace these things, and for the society that we share, the communities that we have. And, for the civilizations we were attempting in a direction or an aim to build. But if there's confusion, right, everybody's suddenly happy, and they're not happy with the way the country is or the way the world is, but they're happy with each other because now they know that there is a higher drive in humanity. In human beings, there has to be a higher drive. So it's me for you, you know. I want to be for you. I'm driven by you. I'm driven for you. I'm driven to you, toward you. And if we could all find that drive, you know, and direct ourselves for one another and not for ourselves individually, then we won't be confused. We won't say, I don't understand why these people want something that I think that I'm giving them. You know, we won't come to that conclusion like governments do. But we have to include the government. We have to raise them alongside us. The world needs to raise itself up, you know, to higher values. So, and to reach these higher values, we have to be inclusive. And, you know, we can't say, well, soldiers are bad because they kill people. We have to scratch all this, oh, I know the right way and you have to follow me business, because it's not going to work for us. We have to work together collaboratively, and we have to adapt ourselves to nature, because the message now is that nature is definitely not going to adapt to us. So to get out of this paradox, we have to find the reason for why we love and hate, and we have to find the direction for this love that we take. And I'm just getting, you know, figurative at this point, but really the enslavement humanity faces is one that we face together. You know, we're enslaved in our nature. We're caught up in our habits, our inclinations, our attitudes against one another, and the opposite to this exists, but it doesn't exist right now. And so instead of being in that sandbox with our little shapes, you know, stacking them like Legos on one another, we have to come to the point where we realize that just because we say we're going to do something doesn't excuse us from actually taking action or enacting and actually doing it. So we don't need to be slaves. We need to free one another.